Advance and be recognized, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Sitrep podcast, your forward operations space for all things military and historical wargaming. I am your host, Oriskany Jim, and today we're going way back into the Black Powder era for a look at the shootout on Concord Bridge, fought on the 19th of April, 1775, opening day for the American Revolution. Now, we actually played this game on the 19th of April, 2025, the exact 250th anniversary of this event, but it takes us a while to get the video out to you guys. Apologies for that. So if you watch this channel, you probably know most of the stories associated with this event. Let's just say that the American Revolution, or the American War of Independence if you prefer, hasn't actually started yet, but tensions are high. This is especially true in Massachusetts, and particularly in Boston, where the embers of revolt smolder the hottest. The British garrison in Boston, under the command of General Thomas Gage, knew that local militias were gathering arms and equipment out in the Massachusetts countryside. Now, we should note that these were legal and legitimate militias, but at the same time, these arms caches were not exactly authorized, and like I said, revolt was in the air. On April 18th, 1775, General Gage sent a column of about 700 men under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Francis Smith out to the Massachusetts town of Concord, where they knew a stockpile of these rebel arms were being hidden, including equipment for artillery of all things. Of course, the British were being watched by rebel sympathizers, and this is where we get the famous 1 if by land, 2 if by sea story, referring to one lantern in the tower of the Old North Church to be lit if the British were coming by the Roxbury Road, and 2 lanterns if they were coming by water over the Charles River. This led to rebel alarm riders being sent out in the dead of night, including, of course, the famous Paul Revere, and eventually the showdown at a village called Lexington. The British column reached Lexington at about 4 or 5 in the morning and were there confronted by some Patriot militia under the command of Captain John Parker, about 77 men in all. Now, like I said, the war hadn't actually started yet, and outnumbered 10 to 1, the American militia weren't exactly about to pick a fight here. This was more of an armed protest. We see what you're doing, we don't like it, and yes, we do have guns, so watch your step. But of course, as we all know, somehow, somewhere, someone fired a shot, probably the most fateful shot in all of American history. In the shootout that followed, 8 rebels were killed, 10 more were wounded, 1 British soldier took a minor flesh wound, and of course the militia scattered. Not exactly the most auspicious start. Pretty much unfazed, the British column continued to the town of Concord, their initial objective, reaching the town about 9 o'clock in the morning. Except by now, a lot more militia had gathered, and they were beyond enraged that so much American blood had been spilled. Meanwhile, the arms and equipment that the British were looking for had been safely hidden away in the woods by now, so the British basically came up with nothing, except for a handful of wooden carriages used to mount artillery on. Okay, these were dragged out into the city square and set on fire, except a lot of nearby militia under the command of Colonel James Barrett saw the smoke from this fire and mistakenly assumed that the British were intentionally torching the town. So about 400 of Barrett's militia came marching back towards Concord, again assuming that the town was being intentionally burned by the British, and here they encountered a holding force on the North Bridge over the Concord River, held by about 100 light infantry under the command of Captain Walter Laurie. Again, for a fateful moment, nobody really knew what to do. Remember, the war still hadn't actually started yet. Until some exhausted, frightened British, remember, these are the guys now outnumbered 4 to 1, decided to fire an unauthorized warning salvo over the heads of the advancing militia. Then they fired again into the militia, killing 2 and wounding 4. Barrett's men halted and fired into the British, this time killing 2 soldiers of the 4th King's Own Regiment and wounding 3 more. The battle for Concord Bridge and the American Revolution were officially on. For this game, we're using a kit bash system of my own design, borrowing elements from all kinds of different black powder systems, chief among them probably being TSR 2nd Edition Battle System. Don't laugh, don't leave, I promise it works, we'll explain as we go. Let's just say that we have Mark playing the dastardly British, and John and Tom playing the heroic colonials. Just kidding, all my British friends. So let's head over to the footage and see how this game unfolds. Okay, so here is our table for today. It measures 7 feet by 6 feet, presented in 20 millimeter. We're looking out of the south into the north. And what we're looking at is the northern outskirts of Concord, where British Grenadiers under Lieutenant Colonel Francis Smith are already in the town. Now Mark's going to have to use some of these figures to search the buildings to find rebel arms and equipment. I should say that one figure equals about 10 men. You'll notice there are about 12 buildings in there, and 5 of them hide objective counters that Mark has to find. Now these 15 figures are the rest of Captain Lawrence Parsons' detached column of light infantry from 5th, 23rd Welch, 38th, and 52nd Regiments of Foot, returning from their search of Barrett's Farm, about 2 miles further to the west. Now they'll show up on turn 3. Here on the bridge, we're looking at Walter Lowry's holding detachment on the North Bridge, 60 light infantry of 4th King's Own and 10th on the far side, and 40 men of his own 43rd Regiment of Foot on the Concord side. And finally here we have the militia, 400 men on Punkatasset Hill, now called Muster Hill. These are gathered from the Concord, Lincoln, Acton, Bedford, and Westford militias. And helping Colonel Barrett is Lieutenant Colonel Robinson and Major Buttrick. So again, back here in the town of Concord itself, we have the rest of Colonel Francis's Grenadiers. I should say these aren't all of his Grenadiers. He does have some guys detached on the South Bridge, that's off the map, and some other guys searching the rest of Concord. We're not trying to represent the entirety of Concord here. And what he's going to have to do is use at least 5 figures to search each of these buildings. So again, he's got 150 men, so 15 figures. He could theoretically search 3 buildings a turn, and again, try to find those hidden objective markers of rebel arms and supplies. And here is the fateful moment. We've got Walter Lowry, who is by all accounts a very inexperienced officer with just 100 light infantry, facing off against 4 times his number. Again, that's 400 Patriot militia who believe that the British just set their town on fire. They're about to pile off of that hill and head toward the bridge with one hell of an attitude problem. This game is officially underway, folks. The British have won initiative, and Mark is moving his detachments of Grenadiers through Concord, and once he gets at least 5 figures base-to-base contact with the building, he can search that building, and hey, look at that, he found his first cache of rebel arms and munitions. Now, historically, the British did find some, but they didn't find nearly as much as they were hoping for. Mark's kidding around about just marching off the table and taking the win. He's kidding around, but that's historically kind of what the British had in mind. More Grenadiers are kicking in more doors. They're going to search this building and this time come up with nothing, except for wrecking my table, because Mark loves wrecking my table at every opportunity. More Grenadiers are conducting another search, and again, he comes up with squadoosh. Meanwhile, Tom and John, commanding Colonel Barrett's militia, are already in motion. They are pushing some of their militia off of Punkatasset Hill and are approaching the bridge. Now we do have to be careful because these 2 formations are only 18 inches apart, and every militia unit does include at least 1 rifleman figure that can already hit at this range. So now they're moving forward some additional militia. Movement in this game for most infantry bases is about 12 inches. Again, it depends on, Grenadiers move a little bit more slowly, but they're more powerful once they actually get into combat, especially bayonets. And again, we are already closing the range with some of those British troops that are holding the north side of Concord Bridge. Fateful decision time. Historically, Captain Lowry withdrew his forward element back across the bridge. Here, Mark is doing the opposite. His forward element is holding its ground. Looks like 10th Regiment is going to fire at the Lincoln County Militia, and the 4th King's Own are going to fire at the Bedford County Militia. Okay, so the range is still pretty long for a Brown Bess musket. Let's take a look at our charts here. We are looking at light infantry at within 12 inches. So militia muskets, British light infantry muskets are going to hit at a 2 within 12 inches. Now there are some bushes and trees between them, so we're going to knock that target number down to a 1. He gets to roll 1d10 per figure, and it looks like he got no hits out of those first 30 light infantry. Again, that's 3 figures worth. Now the further one away is 18 inches away. I apologize, I'm pointing at the militia instead of the light infantry, but the numbers are the same. Again, he's looking for 1s and comes up with nothing. Now Now, a quick word. That British fire that we just saw, that was technically pass-through fire, sort of an opportunity fire that was taken during the American movement. So some of those British will get to shoot again. Meanwhile, the British are completing their movement phase now. Notice that, again, Mark has moved forward the 40 men of the 43rd Regiment of Foot across the bridge. Again, the opposite of what happened historically. Historically, Walter Laurie pulled all of his guys back to his side of the bridge to sort of present what he hoped was going to be a consolidated defense. Here, Mark is doing the opposite. He pushed forward with the 43rd of Foot to join the 10th and the 4th King's Own. And again, now some of these guys are going to get to shoot again. Because, again, the guys who were already there from the 10th and the 4th King's Zone, they took pass-through fire, and while the guys from the 43rd were moving forward. Now that everyone's together, they're going to go ahead and shoot again. It looks like they've already inflicted 2 hits against the Lincoln County Militia. So the Americans are going to get a save. Militia in line only get a 3 to save. So he's going to get 2 chances, because he suffered 2 hits, to roll a 3 or less on a d10. He failed them both, so that's 2 American figures down. When you lose figures, you often have to make a morale check, and long story short, take your first shot. American morale is terrible. They have to roll a 10 or less on 2d10. Luckily, Colonel Barrett is within his command diameter. He gives a +2 bonus, so now Tom has to roll a 12 or less on 2d10, and he succeeds with a 10. So the good news is Lincoln County Militia has taken 2 figures in losses, but their morale remains unshaken. This game is often as much psychological damage as it is kinetic or collateral damage. Okay, both sides have now taken their full fire for turn 1, and yeah, we've racked up quite a few hits. We've already seen the 2 hits taken by the Lincoln Militia. Looks like Bedford Militia has also taken a hit, and the British have taken 5. Again, they're outnumbered 4-1. So, first we're going to roll for Mark's saves. His saves are a little bit better than the Americans because the British are better trained. Out of his 5 hits, though, he has only saved for 1. So he's going to lose 4 figures out of Walter Laurie's command there on the north end of the Concord Bridge. Meanwhile, let's see if this Bedford Militia can save for its 1 hit. Americans, their saves, again, are a little bit worse. They are only saving on a 3, as soon as I can find the right cell on my spreadsheet there. Okay, so Tom rolls a 4, so he fails to save. We'll lose a figure there, and that will trigger a morale check. Alright, so unit suffers its first casualty. Let's go ahead and do that morale. Again, American morale is pretty awful at a 10. And their closest commander is Major Buttrick with a +0, so no +2 this time. We're going to go ahead and see if he can beat a 10 on 2d10. He gets a 13. That unit is now officially shaken. It will move backwards about 4 inches, maintaining its frontage and formation. The unit just sort of recoils and reels back a little bit, having heard the first screams of pain out of its ranks. Now we're going to get to Mark's morale checks, and he actually has to make 2 morale checks. He's got to make one for suffering his first figure lost in the unit, and he's got to make another one for having suffered 4 or more figures in a single step. And again, he's got a +0 commander there. Good news is, British troops are again better trained. His morale starts at a 12. So he's got to beat a 12 twice. He scored exactly 12 the first time. And the second time, he scores a 14. So that unit will also be shaken. Again, moving back 4 inches, maintaining formation and facing. Long story short, take your second shot. They just took 40 combat ineffectives. Yeah, that rung their bell a little bit. Beginning of turn 2, and it looks like Captain Laurie has rallied the remains of his command there on Concord Bridge, and so has Major Buttrick rallied the Bedford Militia there. So that completes the rally phase. We're now in first fires, but I don't think anybody's in range right now after those rally backsteps. So we might head straight over to movement, because I don't think, again, anybody's in range. Progressing to the movement phase, Colonel James Barrett, commanding the Patriot Militia, has 1 initiative, so he chooses to move the first unit. He's getting brave with the Acton Militia there. He's pushing them right up to the base of the bridge, which I kind of get. The Americans are kind of on a clock here, because again, Captain Parsons is coming down that west road with another 150 light infantry at the beginning of turn 3. And I'm actually kind of glad this happened, because this is the closest our table is going to get to that classic moment of an outnumbered British force of light infantry on Concord Bridge facing down an incoming American force of militia. Meanwhile, Mark has got Colonel Smith and his grenadiers searching more buildings. Looks like he's found one additional cache of rebel arms and munitions, and moving with more of his troops through the streets of Concord and knocking down more of my fences. Looks like he is going to... Hey, look at that! He found a third one. Okay, now the British do get a victory point for every one of those rebel caches that they do find there in the streets of Concord. The trade-off is the longer Mark is conducting that search, that's the longer that there are no grenadiers that are supporting the light infantry that are trying to hold the Concord Bridge. Alright, Lincoln County Militia is moving straight up to the brush and swamp kind of area, marshy area, that is facing the Concord Bridge. He's getting very, very close. Again, in this game, the range on these muskets is very, very short, so you do have to get right up on the enemy before you do too much damage. Speaking of taking damage, looks like both sides have exchanged fire. Lincoln Militia has taken 2 additional hits, failed 2 saves. That knocks them down to 4 out of their original 8 figures. That's 50%. That's dangerous. Same thing with the British, because they took 2 hits, only saved for 1. So now they're down to 5 figures out of their original 10. Again, they're also at 50%. And that's, again, a dangerous place to be. Because looking here at the morale triggers, we can see where once a unit hits 50% of its original figures, it has to take a morale check just for that, and then again for every single figure it takes afterwards. And also, when you're at 50%, you're at a -2 penalty. So now, Lincoln Militia has to roll an 8 or less on 2d10, make that a 9 or less, because they are close to Lieutenant Colonel Robinson there, a +1 commander. And with a 12, he does fail against the 9. So, looks like Lincoln Militia is shaken again. They'll be moving back 4 inches. Same basic deal here with Laurie's troops on the bridge. Except they start with a 12, -2 for, again, being reduced to 50%. And there's no good commander near them. So, yeah, they're also going to fail. And, again, they'll also be shaken and move back 4 inches, despite having just withdrawn across the bridge. Turn 3, and this time Mark has won the initiative with Colonel Francis Smith, so he gets to choose whether he wants to move the first unit or not. He says yes, he does want to move the first unit. Sometimes you want to let the enemy move first and then react to that. But here, yeah, he's making the call. It's time for Captain Laurie to abandon his position on the bridge, because long story short, take your third shot. He's down to 50% casualties. He's lost 5 figures, and it's time for him to get out of there. By the way, 5 figures lost does not mean 50 men killed. It's probably 1 or 2 men killed, maybe 3 or 4 wounded per figure. So what he's going to do is, he has a movement of 12. He's going to about face for 2, move 8 inches, and then about face again to get next to that schoolhouse and search the building. Okay, so he searches the building, and turns out there's nothing in there, because, I mean, come on. These rebels are rebels, but they're not monsters. They're not going to hide anything in either the schoolhouse or in either of the churches I have on the table. So, no worries there. Alright, so moving over now to the rebels. They are going to move their first unit, and Tom's big priority now is to start to pivot some of his units to the west, because again, we're now at the beginning of turn 3, and again, Captain Parsons is returning with 150 more light infantry from their search of Colonel Barrett's farm. So there's a couple ways he could do this. There's a wheeling movement that he could do to move this particular militia unit to take cover behind the hedges there, or he could do like a right face and then change his frontage, but either way, he's got it done. In the streets of Concord, Mark, in the role of Colonel Francis Smith, looks like he's more or less given up his searches of these buildings and is instead pushing forward his detached grenadier companies to reinforce the more or less collapsed British position at the bridge. Meanwhile, John and Tom are pivoting, looks like 2 militia units, so it's Concord Militia and I believe it was Westford Militia, to the west against the arrival of Captain Parsons' column. Again, that is light infantry of the 5th, 23rd Welch, 38th, and 52nd Regiments of Foot. These guys were searching Colonel Barrett's farm. Historically, there was no additional combat here, because by the time these guys returned to the area, the Americans had already withdrawn off the bridge. That's not happening this time, I can promise you that. In fact, it looks like Acton Militia has already taken the bridge, and looks like they actually want to hold it. Now, as long as American militia reach the bridge at least once, they get 5 victory points for that to fulfill their historical conditions. But again, here come the British Grenadiers, and that's going to be a problem. Wrapping up movement on turn 3, once again we have the shaken survivors of Captain Laurie's detachment searching that schoolhouse. Again, they didn't find anything. And the Grenadiers are slowly marching up to the bridge. They do have a slower movement rate. They only move 9 inches a turn, but they're not going to be as easy to push around as those light infantry, I can promise you that. Meanwhile, on the bridge itself, again, we have the Acton Militia that is holding the bridge for the moment. And then back on the north side of the bridge, it looks like Tom has 3 different militias, Westford, Bedford, and Concord, facing off against Parsons' column, which is no longer in column. They have now gone online. By the way, we are way off the historical track by this point. Historically, the Battle of Concord is already over, but here on our table, we're just getting warmed up. There wasn't any fire at the end of turn 3, everybody was still out of range, so moving on to the morale phase of turn 4, Mark catches a really terrible break. You saw that 18 in his dice tray. That was his morale check to try to rally Laurie's survivors. Remember, Laurie's unit starts off with a morale of 12, reduced by 1 for being shaken, reduced by 2 more for being reduced to 50%. That makes it a 9. Now, Colonel Smith was nearby, that gave him a +2. The problem is that only cranks his morale back up to an 11, and he rolls an 18. And when you miss a morale by 7 or more, it's considered a catastrophic failure, and it's an automatic instant rout.
Damn him! Damn that man!
He might rally them later, but we're going to have to see how that goes. On to the movement phase of turn 4. The Americans win initiative, but for a while, nobody wants to move first, because there is a hell of a standoff shaping up here, with 3 complete militias facing off against Parsons' column of 150 fresh light infantry coming in from the west. You see them there behind those trees in the distance. So keep an eye on this little bit of real estate. Things are about to heat up in a big way. Alright, so heading over to Mark's movement, he's got some Grenadiers on the south side of the bridge in Concord town. Not sure if he's going to search some more buildings or... oh, nope, he's moving forward with more Grenadiers. So it looks like Mark is going to try to catch the Americans in a bit of a crossfire between his Grenadiers on the south side of Concord Bridge and Captain Parsons' column coming in from the west. So please stay tuned, because this game is about to escalate in a big way. We're just getting started. So there you are so far, folks. As you can probably tell, this game is going to depict an event that is much bigger and much bloodier than the historical shootout on Concord Bridge. I call it a shootout because I feel weird calling it the Battle of Concord. I mean, come on, the whole thing was basically 2 volleys. But of course, our players know that they're firing the first shots of a war that's eventually going to last 8 years, span the entire globe, and involve at least half a dozen separate powers. They've got no reason to hold back. Conversely, for the guys who were actually there, this was probably a little surreal. This would be like, local cops firing at the U.S. Army in some random American town. It was probably a little surreal. Anyway, please come back next week to see how the rest of our battle for the Concord Bridge finishes up. And that's where we're going to leave it for now, folks. Thanks very much for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed this content. Please remember to hit that notification bell. Also, please consider joining the Sitrep Podcast Discord. There is an auto-accept invitation link to our Discord in the description of this video. Join our community, see what everybody's up to, and best of all, show us what's happening on your hobby table. But for now, this is Risky Jim with the Sitrep Podcast. We are rounds complete for another episode. And as always, Tango Mike for watching.